everyone, and welcome to Finance 101, a brand new series brought to you by the Macquarie University Applied Finance Society's podcast, FinTalk. In this series, we'll break down the essentials of personal finance into bite sized, easy to follow episodes. I'm your host, Shreya, the podcast director of the Applied Finance Society, and today we're thrilled to have a very special guest joining us. A powerhouse in the world of finance, Professor Elizabeth Sheedy is a distinguished member of the Macquarie Business School faculty, part of the Department of Applied Finance. This year, she'll be shaping the minds of future leaders in the Master of Banking and Finance program. Her impressive teaching portfolio includes the Master of Applied Finance and the Global MBA, where she's inspired countless students over the years. But her impact doesn't stop in the classroom. Elizabeth has made waves with her groundbreaking research. Starting with risk management and the culture of financial institutions, she has now turned her attention to household finance, diving into topics like financial resilience, the home ownership challenge, and the complexities of debt. Her passion for understanding and improving the financial decision making of young adults makes her a perfect guest for our podcast. And did we mention, she is not just an expert in theory, but she's also a mother to four young adults, bringing a unique blend of academic expertise and real world wisdom to the conversation. Welcome to FinTalk, Elizabeth. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Shreya. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Today, we're diving into something that's absolutely essential for anyone wanting to take control of their money: setting and achieving financial goals. Whether you're a student managing part time income, just stepping into your first full time job, or simply starting to think about your financial future, clear goals can make all the difference. It's very easy to say that you want to save money, but without a plan, that goal can feel more like wishful thinking than a real target. And that's why we're here today, to break down how to move from vague intentions to meaningful milestones. We'll be talking about how to prioritize what matters, build routines that stick, and actually stay on track. So, Elizabeth, we all know it's important to have financial goals, but let's be honest, I think a lot of us start with something very vague, like I want to save more. And that really doesn't give us a clear direction or a sense of progress. So, how can having clear and specific financial goals actually help us gain confidence and find our footing when it comes to managing our personal finance?
Yeah, well, look, when we did our research on financial decision making of young adults, we found that actually a lot of people really struggled to say what their financial goals are or how they related to their broader life goals. I think it's really good to have a big strategy and goals, and it helps you to be more intentional about the way you live your life rather than just let life happen to you. So let me kind of explain a little bit more about the what I mean. What are the kind of the big picture strategies that people might have? Okay, so if you've been studying economics and finance here at Macquarie, you would certainly be aware, that the traditional economic models assume that most people are wealth maximizing. Okay, so they want to be as wealthy as possible over time and have the highest possible standard of living. And that often goes hand in hand with home ownership, okay, because it's seen as a great way of maximising wealth in Australia. So I think it's still the case that is probably what the majority of people think. But it's not what everybody thinks, and I think we need to recognise that. So one thing that we noticed is that, for example, a lot of people now are actually starting to question whether home ownership is for them. So because housing has become so expensive in cities like Sydney, a lot of people are saying, look, it's too much of a sacrifice. I would rather just be a long-term renter. Okay? And, maybe I can invest in other things other than just my own home. So that would be, I think that's a really important question to really start confronting. Is this something you want? Because what a number of young people also are starting to say is, look, I don't want to be in that mortgage prison. For me, I would prefer to focus on experiences. Okay, so travel and so forth. So thinking, and inevitably there's some trade-offs there. You can't have it all, right? So, well, unless you're extremely rich. most of us are going to have to make some trade offs and say, to what extent am I want to be focused on building wealth for the long term, or am I more focused on the here and now and enjoying today? Okay? And so it's not up to me to tell you what you should, what your strategy should be. Everyone, you get to decide that. It's your life. But all I would say is you guys need to really think about the consequences of that choice. Okay, so if you're spending too much on the here and now, I guess the danger is that you leave yourself short in the future. Your future self might start to, question some of the choices that you made in your 20s and whether that was really sensible. So I would just say, think about it. Just one other group that we came across, which was really interesting. I don't know if you've heard about what's called the FIRE movement. FIRE is an acronym that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. So these are people that really, for them, it's all about independence. They don't want to be reliant on an employer. They don't want to be reliant, they don't want to have debt. They don't want, in other words, they don't want to be reliant on a financial institution. But who am I to judge that and say, perhaps that's an alternative path to life satisfaction? And it's not for me to say that's the wrong choice. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's what I mean. Sort of, if think about what are your long-term goals? Because that then is going to inform the decisions that you make in the here and now and what your short-term goals are.
Yes, that's such a great way to look at it. But once we have our goals set, I imagine it's easy to feel like you're being pulled in a few different directions. So, how would you say we can prioritize our goals without feeling too overwhelmed when we're juggling saving and spending and maybe even investing?
Yeah. Well, look, I think the standard advice would be in terms of priorities. If you have any debts like credit card or buy now, pay later, the very first thing you should be doing is getting rid of that stuff. Okay. Then the next step, regardless of what your long term goals are, you should have an emergency savings fund. Okay, sometimes people call that a rainy day fund. So those two things are probably those are foundational, I would say, regardless of what your longer term strategy is. Once you've cleared those, then it's time to then that's when it starts to get more interesting. But ultimately, it comes down in your 20s. It's all about building good saving and spending habits, okay? Because the habits that you establish now are going to have very significant long term consequences.
Yeah, that's a very great approach. Let's now shift focus to balancing short term and long term goals.
Mm-hmm.
Many young adults face this challenge of whether they should prioritize saving for the future or focusing on managing current expenses. How can they find that sweet spot without feeling like something is always being sacrificed?
Okay, so I think we need to look at these current financial needs, okay, and really scrutinize to what extent are they really needs as opposed to wants. Is it discretionary? Okay, that's the issue. And so if it's discretionary, that's what needs to be questioned. Okay, so a lot of most financial institutions now have really good apps that allow you to track your spending, and so you should be checking to see where is your money going. Okay, making sure that you're not making that you're intentional in the way you go about your spendings and your budgeting. So things that we normally think of as discretionary would be like eating out or buying clothes beyond what's essential. So what we could do is a logical way of addressing that is setting yourself a budget at the start of the year, making sure that and that then you can make sure that you are tracking against that budget and not unintentionally going into a lot of unnecessary spending that is ultimately going to hurt your financial future.
Okay, so big financial goals like saving for a house or a car, or even maybe building wealth, can honestly feel very intimidating. And somewhere along the way, I imagine that it can be easy to lose motivation, especially when the finish line seems so far off. So, Elizabeth, do you have any go to strategies for staying on track and not giving up on those bigger long term goals?
Okay, so there's a lot of research now about goal setting, and this applies. It's not just in the area of finances, but things like diet and exercise. We know a lot now about how this works, and the problem is that if your goal looks too hard to achieve, you mentally give up. Okay, so what you need to do to overcome that, you need to break it down into something that looks achievable. If you've never exercised before, you don't set your, you might have the long term goal of running a marathon, but your first goal might be to go for a run for 5 minutes. Okay, so make it achievable, and then as you achieve those short term goals, you start to experience success. And that feels good. And then that makes it possible for you to take the next step. Oh, maybe I can run for 10 minutes next week. So, exactly the same principle applies with money. So maybe let's say that you want to move out of home. And so you want to save enough for a rental bond so that you can live independently of your family. Okay, so maybe you know that you're going to need $2,000 for that. Okay, so make it easy, break it down. So you say, well, I need to save, say, $50 each week. Okay? Then, as you achieve each goal, celebrate the win. Okay? Hopefully, not by spending it all. In some other way, give yourself some sense of reward. You've achieved it, and then continue on and set the next goal. And like any habit, the more you get into the habit of saving, the easier it will become. Just like once you start exercising, the habit gets established. Okay, there's actually a really good book out about atomic habits, which is sort of talking generally about this process of how do you create habits. And there's a lot of really good advice there.
That's such an important point. I think our mindset plays such a huge role in how we approach saving, and oftentimes it's not just a lack of willpower, but the way our goals are framed that makes it harder for us to follow through. And one of the key behavioral biases at play here is present bias, which is a tendency to focus on short term comfort instead of long term rewards. And when a financial goal feels too big or too far away, we can often lose motivation even before we begin. So, Elizabeth, how can breaking a big financial goal into smaller, more achievable steps help us overcome present bias and actually build long term savings habits? And how would you tie this into that broader idea of forming habits over time?
Okay, so psychology is definitely teaching us a lot about the common mistakes in money management. Present bias, that's the idea that we think too much about the here and now. What am I doing tonight? When can I, what about this assignment that's due? What about this exam? And we don't think enough about the future. The future feels far off and irrelevant, but one day it will arrive and you're going to have to live with the choices that you made today. Are you going to have regrets? So that's why it's good to have future goals and make them salient. One strategy that people find really useful is to have a vision board. Okay, so a visual reminder on your wall with pictures of how you visualize your future self. Maybe it's a car, maybe it's a home. Put up pictures that is going to help you stay focused on what your real goal is, and because without that clear sense of your future self, it's so easy to fall into impulse buying behavior. It gives you a sugar rush today, but it's actually going to detract from your future.
All right, for our last question, we've already heard how psychology shapes our money habits, especially with things like present bias, where we focus too much on the now and lose sight of the future. Elizabeth, what are some common challenges people face when working towards their financial goals, and how can they overcome them to stay motivated and on track?
Okay, so we've already dealt with a number of them, but couple more that I would like to mention is try to avoid lifestyle creep. Okay, so that's a tendency where as your earnings increase, okay, and this is going to be true for a lot of you guys, you're in the through your 20s, you're in that phase of life where your earnings should be growing rapidly because you're building your skills and you're getting more qualifications. So your earnings will grow. There's a tendency to spend more as you earn more. So make sure that each time you get a pay rise, you are allocating more into savings and your future. So you can, here and now, while you're in your 20s, this is a place where you can actually avoid that.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of today's episode. Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts. I'm sure you've given our listeners a lot to think about when it comes to setting goals and staying on track financially. Before we sign off, do you have any final words or advice for our listeners?
No, I would just admit it is always hard. Even I'm much older than you guys, and I still struggle with these issues. But it's practice. Develop those habits, and that is going to set you up for longer term success.
That's great. Thank you so much. And finally, to all our listeners, thank you so much for joining and listening to us. We hope you have a lot to take away from this episode, and we hope that your next steps in your financial journey are a big success. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you in our next episode. This podcast provides general information only and is not financial advice. The information shared may not be suitable for your specific situation. We strongly encourage you to seek personalized advice from a qualified financial advisor before making any financial decisions.